Welcome to Greenhouse Grower to Grower, the podcast where we talk to growers from across the greenhouse industry about market trends, innovation, their biggest challenges and opportunities, and more. I'm Brian Sparks, editor of Greenhouse Grower. Earlier this year, during Cultivate 24, our team at Greenhouse Grower presented our Head Grower of the Year award to Tom Costamagna of Young's Plant Farm. Tom has a rich history in floriculture, and following the award presentation, I had an extensive conversation with Tom about everything from his background to how he thinks outside the box when problem solving, to how his early influences have shaped the type of grower he is today. In this episode of Greenhouse Grower to Grower, you'll hear part one of our conversation. Let's get started. If you want to talk just a bit, about Young's Plant Farm, some of the main crops that you grow, who you sell to, and things like that.
All right. Well, Young's Plant Farm, located with two farms in East Alabama and one in Andrews, North Carolina. We're roughly 56 acres of greenhouse, 40 acres of outdoor production. Annuals, perennials, garden mums, holiday crops is basically the core of our business. And like annual growers became perennial growers, what's on the horizon now is woody ornamentals and shrubs.
Okay.
Our major accounts are Walmart, Lowe's, Tractor Supply, and Marvin's.
Okay.
And, from a Young standpoint, you have second generation still heavily involved, but you have a good presence of third generation. And everyone's kind of got their own little sector, whether it's, Drew Young in cultivation, Brian Young, basically chief administrator officer, Brandon, who's production and shipping, Catherine, who's Rob's daughter, which is in logistics. It's kind of nice to have, this multi-generational, but they all kind of got their niches in the company.
Yeah. So you mentioned there expanding a little bit into woody ornamentals and shrubs. So is that something where you've been able to take existing greenhouse space and just changed it over to the crops, or have you added new production facilities to handle that?
Well, we're not 100% clear where it's going to go entirely. So this year we had to service 50 stores. This is on the Walmart side.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're working closely with Flowerwood, Tom Dodge, Stokely's, and so forth. And so this year was primarily a learning year where we cross-docked and we're running some trials.
Okay.
I think if you were to have a discussion with the top 20 or top 10 growers, I mean, where woody ornamentals has the challenge is that they're not at the store level on a weekly basis where we are with our business. And
Sure.
So, whether it's working directly with Flowerwood or cross-docking, I think, in the long run, much like the Metro model, if you will, 50% is grown in-house, 50% is contract grown out. I think there's going to be a hybrid, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out, where Young's will definitely produce some, but I think we're also going to rely on some of the industry leaders. But where they're located, 3.5 hours south of us, we can extend the season of Encore azaleas or endless hydrangeas. So I think there's going to be, partnerships and synergies. And, the ruling's not where this is going to go, but where I see the woody industry having challenges different than the ornamental, or not the ornamentals, but the annuals and perennials and so forth. Perennials, for the most part, have been annualized because the stock is now grown, south of the border. It's virus, it's clean, where the woody side, a lot of it is in-house stock plants. It's not virus indexed and so forth.
Okay.
So where I think we could help our partners or contract growers long-term would actually, working with Express or Ball to get that, out of the country, clean it up, but then having Young's being, familiar with annual propagation, perennial propagation, work on the propagation side, and then provide our contract growers with healthy, virus-free, clean inputs.
Okay.
Because they're, where I've seen the losses where, we all work on similar margins, but, our shrink is pretty much non-existent. And when I go to a nursery industry, the shrink is, it's like I step back in time. I can't say I've been in the industry 40 years now, but it's, pushing 25, and it almost like you went back in time. But there's also people on the other end. I mean, I don't know if you know Panoramic Farms and Dave Height. I mean, it's a
Mm.
nursery where I've been recently, and I feel like I need to take my shoes off. There's not weeds, there's not dirt in the gravel. So I mean, there's every extreme in this industry,
Yeah.
whether it's annuals, perennials, woodies, trees, and so forth.
Okay. So let's talk about, your current role at Young's Plant Farm. And if you take a step back from that a little bit, some of the roles that you've had in the past and how that led to what your current role is today.
All right. Well, originally, my position here at Young's was not replacing anybody. It was for the organic growth the organization has seen. So,
Mm.
now going for some years ago, Young's was in their third year of perennials, but that was basically, walk, run. Now we're going to sprint, and
Mm.
we had to gear up to service not only our Walmart business, our Lowe's business. So they brought me on board to not only say take the lead on that, but also help the growing team. So, Young's has been with H2A for more than 20 years. We're very, very fortunate in our staff. We have some H2A people that have been here 10 plus,
Wow.
in some cases 15 years, that actually run production, run shipping, integral parts of growing. But they've learned on the job. So I come with a pretty diverse background and network of people. And so, Royal Hines is a consultant here, and I've known him for a long time, but was kind of bringing, being a liaison between owners and directors, but also being on the cultivation side, bringing new ideas, identifying opportunities in the market, whether it was foliage from tissue culture, tropicals, and so forth, and just, guide the company in several different ways. Where I've been fortunate is where I started and where I am today. So I've had essentially several careers, and unfortunately in this industry, you either get promoted within a company and then you become stagnant, or you want to be, the world's your oyster. So,
Okay.
I went to Davis. I had a degree in landscape architecture with a minor in environmental horticulture. I was fortunate to work for Dr. Michael Perella based on my upbringing. My father, surgeon, he was adamant, or loved gardening, whether it was roses, camellias, you name it. And so, being the eldest of three, I was always the one for the landscape chores, the mowing, the pruning, the fertilizing, and so forth. My dad was so into it, he actually showed roses. So I learned, you know, especially in Southern California, powdery mildew control, botrytis, thrips, mites, and all that kind of stuff. And so, when I went to UC Davis, my dad's always ingrained, work ethic and working and all that kind of stuff. So I had to pay my way through college. And so I applied for a greenhouse job just because I had the background. And at that time, roses were still being produced in California. I think at the time there were still about 85 growers before it all migrated to Colombia and Ecuador. And here comes an undergrad with experience and knowledge of the chemical. So I was a shoe-in in Mike's program, and we really just hit it off, as far as my curiosity and my passion for plants. And so, there's a couple things at Davis a lot of people don't know. Davis at that time was the number one ag school in the world. Today, it's the Wagenhagen when it comes to greenhouses. But at that time period, and still to date, I don't know what they've increased greenhouse wise space, but we had 268,000 square feet of greenhouse.
Oh, wow.
Old Lord Burnham's all the way through modern day Rao greenhouses. So I was exposed to Argus, Hugendorn, QCOM, Microgrow, and all those kinds of stuff. And even during that time when Mike became the associate dean of the College of Ag, most academia programs shrink.
Hmm.
And because we had such a synergy working together, we actually grew the program. So I got exposed to helping, sit on the committee that built the biosafety level 3 quarantine facility there. And that was interesting because you go through double HEPA filter and bulletproof glass and all this kind of stuff. And it took a year and a half to commission it because the stinking Argentine ants were getting in it, of all things. And so, I spent about 10 years there. It was a time where we worked through. California had the zero fluent runoff laws go into effect. So whether it was
Mm,
Nurseryman's Exchange on the coast of Half Moon Bay or Carpinteria, all these folks were forced to recirculate and recycle water. And even though some of them were Dutch descent, it's a whole different thing in the climate of the Netherlands versus the climate of California. So I got exposed to a lot of different things.
mm,
And at a certain point, got married, had my first daughter, and because I was a senior superintendent of agriculture, I started at a pretty high level. So my only real option was either go back to school, and I didn't want to be a specialist in any one thing. I like being a generalist.
yeah.
And so, I took that leap of faith and went on the commercial side. But, my first big commercial greenhouse was Mid-American Growers in Granville, Illinois,
Hmm.
and hired by Nick and Lenny. And at that time, big greenhouses were getting bigger. In specific regions, the Midwest, the Mid-Atlantic, the Southeast, and really these greenhouses started becoming factories. And so, the way you used to run them as a mom and pop or even a garden center, the automation was the old Fleer machines and 606s, or just your different climates between the seasons. The economies of scale between shipping and producing and getting the dollars on the cart. They basically hired me from my, say, academic scientific background. How do we put quality assurance or quality control measures in so we can produce consistent high quality but
Hmm.
actually be making money at it?
Yeah.
Because at times, when I interviewed there, the funny thing was I was there for, I don't know, 6 hours, and we were talking about needing to be a referee and a supporting people. And after all these different topics, you're like, well, what about the plants? They're like, well, that's going to be the easiest part. You have 300 years of grower experience there. And I'm like, well, why is that a bad thing? But there's sometimes you hear a Dutch saying of wood shoes wood head wouldn't do it. So you have a group of growers that have been there, and kind of the facility outgrows them.
Yeah.
And so they're not leaning on the new techniques. And so I was put into place to bring all those ideas. And that's where I started the relationships with the Metrolina and Yvonne and Mark Verdell. The best thing at that time, we would fly to one another's facilities. So we
Okay.
were fortunate to have a company plane. So I could hit up Green Circle, Metrolina. We often went to the Heartland, or anybody in the family. Owners would meet and they kick the growers out in the greenhouses. So we'd walk each other's crops, which was amazing, because you technically you're family, but you're also competitors.
Right.
But when it came to the growing, the Van Wingertons definitely encourage information sharing amongst their growing team. And
Okay.
so that was a fantastic chapter of my life. And then, as you're a big grower, people are always interested, well, what would it take to work for me? Or what, what other interest do you have? And so I wouldn't say at that time I was bored or tired of the large scale production, but
Yeah.
I was approached by Perry Wiesman, and that was the time when Dooman was still Dooman, not even Dooman Group yet. And Mid American had just gone through a transition, being bought out by ColorPoint,
Hmm.
and which I have a great relationship with Art and Ken, and still Craig Daniel and the team. And heck, Bruce Daniel works for us here at Young's now. And so I was always intrigued going to the flower farms and seeing the other side of the business. I mean, you're literally producing cuttings, throwing them in a box, putting them on a plane. And at that time, it was still heavy Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda. Yeah, you had some presence in Mexico, some presence in Guatemala, but Dooman hadn't even built Las Mercedes in El Salvador. So,
Okay.
basically Perry dangled the carrot. Apparently he knew what was to come more than I did. And then we kind of went on, or Dooman went on a buying frenzy, whether it was Fetus, Oro, Eki, Ogilvy. I mean, you name it. And so I took that position knowing I was signing up for 20%, realized that it was more likely going to be 40, but the number of acquisitions that happened in such a short time, I was traveling, pretty much my last year there, I flew 197,000 miles in a year.
Oh,
So,
geez.
I've always said I didn't get married to get divorced, and we never had kids to be single parents. So at a certain point, enough was enough, and basically had to go back to my roots.
Hmm.
But wouldn't trade that for anything. Learning all those aspects of the stock side. Working closely with Royal. At that time was Oro, and under the technical team at Dooman. A lot of what I've brought to the table today comes from that chapter in life. And so, you know, basically the hardest thing I would say being a national production manager for Dooman, which I got accustomed to prior, my days at Davis, my days at Mid-Am, is you really miss walking the greenhouses every day. So in that executive management position, yes, there's a lot of travel, there's a lot of meetings or webinars and stuff, and it's face to face, but it's not walking facilities and solving problems.
Yeah.
And so even though it was a great learning experience, my heart and home was really, what can I do in the greenhouse? And through those times, I've met many different people, and it's probably a good portion of why I'm here at Young's. I met Drew Young on a cast trip. I met Brian Young visiting stock farms. So, our industry is so different. At Cultivate, there was a lady talking that she was from the tool side of the business, specifically selling ladders, and all I could think is how boring. But what she found amazing is just how everybody knows everybody, and it's like a second family. Where these other industries, it's so different. And so, you know, Royal from Estuardo Arriaga, his former business partner who's at Express Seed, they often say there's two things that you take to the grave: your suit and your reputation. So you often think about that in our industry. You can't really burn a bridge because you never know where you're going to land or who you'll be working with. And so, that got me here to Young's years later. My wife and I met when I was at Davis, so it's great to be back in a college town raising, four kids. I got two girls, two boys, and we had them compounded. We had four kids under the age of 5 without any twins. So I guess technically close to Irish twins, but having those activities, Granville, Illinois, middle of nowhere. When I worked at American Color, even though it was close to DC or Charlottesville, the city of Orange is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. My wife, just taking my kids to school each day, drove 3 hours a day.
Oh,
So,
geez.
it's we kind of flip roles. I was traveling for work, and now she was traveling for our children. So it was just really great to land here in Young's and be part of a, multi-generational family. We're kind of like our own little island where we're at here in, Auburn. We're supplying the panhandle of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, a little bit of Eastern Texas, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And so, we have Metro and Costa to the east, and then we got Altman's to the west, but there's a lot of, say, states and buffer between us. So
Right.
it's just great to work with the company. I don't know if you've ever been to Young's, but we kind of always joke because some people come and then we call it a plant resort because if we here in Alabama, a lot of people don't realize our average rainfall is 55 inches a year. So it compares to the Pacific Northwest, and then we have 10% of the country's fresh water. So things are lush and green, but our properties are pretty much kept up like a golf course or a park, and it makes you feel good. And when that's just part of the culture, sanitation and so forth. I mean, it's just those little things that makes everybody's life easier, but it also just has a good feeling, every day when you're at work, and for your visitors and everything. So it was just a good fit that developed from some casual conversations and it became needs. And just like this this award, I mean, it just shows you that, people think of you, and you never know, when you get that phone call, and what would you think about coming out here? So, other thing I've learned too, you never not have a conversation.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit in a nutshell, or maybe a long bit of my background and journey to getting to Young's.
Oh, I love the story there too. And I remember you were telling me that, your father was a surgeon, you said. And so to be able
Correct.
to go from one direction there to almost a completely different direction, still science focused, but in a much different way was really fascinating.
Yeah, so for me, I didn't tell my father for 6 months because I thought I was going to get disowned. And the best thing he ever said is like, at that time, he was he practiced medicine for 30 years. So he was lucky he was he's done with his residency at age 20 and retired at age 50. So he got in and got out. And basically, what he said is, I never asked my office what type of insurance people had because I didn't want that to, affect, helping them. And he
Right.
said, if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't practice medicine because I'm not practicing medicine in a lot of ways. It's, how good or what insurance people have that dictates, you know, what cover they have to actually get them healed or surgery or so forth, which is
Yeah.
kind of backwards.
I'm sure. Yeah. Um, so I want to kind of sort of transition to kind of where you are today at Young's Plant Farm. And, first of all, just as you ask, what on a day-to-day basis, what do you see as some of the best parts of your job or the most rewarding parts of your job? And then, kind of and the flip side of that, what are some of the challenges that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I would say the best part of the job is, I call it the fruit bowl, if you will. So, between annuals and perennials and holiday crops and this and that, it's not monoculture. So I think I'd go absolutely insane if I had to grow tomatoes, for example. Like the picture behind me is Almeria in Spain. That's 20,000 hectares, primarily peppers and some other vegetables. But the best part of the job is the seasonality. Even though
Yeah.
we produce annuals and perennials year round, those still have peaks and valleys. And right now we're in the thick of it for garden mums. And knock on wood, this has been a pretty good year. And we stuck poinsettias 2 weeks ago for the first batch of the year and so forth. So the highlight is just being able to grow so many different crops and then be able to get out of them and or put them on the back burner at a lesser volume when it comes to annuals and perennials, um, and then be able to pick it up again the following year.
Yeah.
um, the biggest challenge, we deal with living organisms that don't communicate by words. And, quality in our world is not related to yield, it's related on aesthetics. So, uh, we're always walking crops, we're always encouraging, it doesn't matter if you're in the growing department or production, if something doesn't look right or something doesn't feel like, there is no bad or dumb question, so the challenge is finding all those problems as
Hmm.
quick as possible and reacting to those problems. And sometimes, we don't always have the answers, but you're always doing something until you get the answers. Um, but that's it's a challenge, but at the end of the day, uh, sometimes things present themselves as one thing, and then with the tools we have today, in-house and externally, it's gotten much easier with the fantastic breeding, whether it's downy mildew resistance or phytophthora resistance. So I mean, it's never going to be easier, but I
Yeah.
think the breeding and the tools that we have today are much better than when I started in the industry.
Well, and it's funny because I definitely want to talk about those tools and then the aesthetic qualities of plants here in just a few. But before we even get to that, one of the things I want to ask about, and really kind of struck out or stood out to me, during some of our initial conversations was, the focus on plant quality, and a lot of it has to do with um, metrics and collecting data, collecting metrics, and then making informed decisions based on that. You hear a lot of people say that you can collect all the data that you want, but it really means nothing unless you can react and make informed decisions based
Yeah.
on what that data is. Can you talk about the importance of that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So, with the majority of our growing team being H2A, it's not necessarily a language barrier, but it's one of those things where you and I can have a conversation, but it might not relate to the people doing the work. And so whether, we use a combination of flagging systems, we also, instead of like saying day one or day 21, you try to make visual indicators of when things need to be applied. There's some genetics that are more aggressive, there's some more genetics that are compact. So instead of putting on a period of time or a precise, early in the crop or later in the crop, one thing we do for especially applying PGRs is we look at the percent of the pot being covered by
Mm-hmm.
plant material versus soil. So one thing I'll say is like you have a calliope geranium. It's much more aggressive than say a presto geranium. So if you try to say I need to apply something at a certain date, well, one might be underregulated because of its vigor, or one might be get overregulated from one's vigor. And so, what I've worked with Drew Young and our team here has been, we don't try to make giant changes in the moment, but when we
Yeah.
see things being repeated, whether it's poor crop timing, poor application timing, we try to snapshot that internally for the grow team as well as our production team. So, we originally started with a program called Quip. That's what's used by our merchandiser. A little slow as far as taking images and uploading it to the cloud. We now heavily rely on WhatsApp with different groups and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, here, even though we have booms, we do some stuff still by hand, applications if you're drenching a fungicide and PGR and so forth. But for us, we want to make an application once. And the
Yeah.
analogy that I'll use is so, everyone's typically using bonsai or paclobutrazol is a very, say, prominent PGR in the world of growing ornamental plants. So what we've come up with is a way to limit that. So early season, you'll start off at say 2 ppm bonsai. When it starts getting warmer, you might be going up to 4 ppm bonsai. And then, when I started, or just in general, growers sometimes will apply multiple applications. So
Yeah.
there's a cost to the labor, there's a cost to the chemical, and so forth. So we actually make a lot of category groups, whether how we group plants together in prop or how we apply PGR. So, if we're going to make a one application of 2 parts bonsai or 4 parts bonsai, we want to be one and done. If that can't hold the plant, we've come up with, you can go to a 1 part concise or uniconazole. And if that doesn't work because you don't want to spend the time, or we don't have the time in the heat of spring,
Right.
then we go to 1 part top floor. So, myself, Drew Young, and the team is always just trying to look at creating these matrices so we can actually just be a lot more efficient. I didn't, in my notes, I alluded to the expansion of 20 acres on the backside to replace some outdoor growing.
Yeah.
We did not add one person to the growing team. It was just through our efficiencies. So, and some of them I'm responsible, and some of it's internally. Like Drew Young figured out, we use booms in the greenhouses for tables. Well, we figured out in the field situation, a boom is a very useful tool. And this is not a mechanical boom requiring electricity. It is a simple frame that uses the same turrets and nozzles that you would do inside. But
Okay.
instead of 8 guys using a water wand, 2 guys can do the equivalent of 8 people's work, and they can stand next to each other, pushing this along in the field, whether it's applying fungicide, insecticide, or PGR. And literally, they can have a conversation all day versus pulling a hose and stressing out, making sure they're getting every amount of chemical in every pot in the same volume.
Yeah.
It's been those kind of wins and a lot of times simple technologies that goes a long way.
Well, and that's interesting too. I mean, the fact that it's not just about making the operation and the production stage as efficient as possible. I mean, to your point, the more you can help your team become more efficient, the more they're going to appreciate, even if it's sometimes viewed as major changes to what you're doing, if it makes their jobs easier and if they can focus on areas that maybe need a little more attention, I'm sure that's rewarding to them as well.
Definitely, definitely. And when you're, an operation of our size, I mean, people underestimate how simple flagging can be because, a lot of times, crews are split up. So you have somebody who might be applying bonsai as a PGR and you have other people irrigating. And as simple as it is, you know, uh, fertilize, clear water, spray, drench, no water. A lot of times in operations this size or even larger, someone could come in and make an application and crews get moved around. And the next thing you know, you're wondering why the application didn't work. Well, the application was applied in the morning, and guess what? Sprinklers got ran in the afternoon. So, your application was diluted. And,
Yeah.
having our crews are bilingual, but having simple colored flag systems with simple things as, you put a drench flag and gets drenched. And then, obviously you want that drench to be absorbed. So as soon as they're done with the drench, they're pulling those flags and putting no water. So
Yeah.
that no water flag is there for a minimum of 24 hours, in the summertime. And in the wintertime, we'll definitely try to stretch it out as long as possible because, the plants aren't transpiring and taking up water and nutrients as quickly. But those little things, like the other ones I mentioned, I mean, improves consistency, and a result of consistency, you get quality. I think it was Will Healy in years ago in several of his talks. An A+ grower doesn't do everything 100% on time,
Hmm.
but if you do 85% of what needs to be done on time, you'll be a good grower. And it's things like that is, your arch enemy is your weakest link, and your weakest link and more often is not your people's ability, it's just having the different tasks communicated. So,
Yeah.
internally we have a power app that we use on our phone that has tasks so people know when they were done, who did them when they were done and stuff. And I mean, I think where the technology are, I mean, we're at its infancy, and we're using, you know things like WhatsApp that's free, or starting to build internal programs.
Right.
But it's just for example, when I was at Mid-Am, an 80-acre facility, and you only got so many hours a day, and when you're 50% administrative, I used to tell my growers, I have 5 minutes an acre a day. You have to bring me the problems because I physically want to find the problems, but there's not enough time in the day with my other responsibilities to walk every row every day.
Yeah.
Now, my role here at Young's, I mean, yes, there's a administrative aspect, but I would say it's the 70-30 rule. I spend 70% of my time with the growers in the greenhouse
Hmm.
and 30% of my time in an administrative role, um, just because that piece of it's necessary, but boots on the ground is what's going to make us a stronger company.
Yeah. Yeah. There's another area that I really want to focus in on, and when it's based on a lot, some of our previous email conversations, we talked about where you go to get information, about just improving quality, just general production information. And one of the things you mentioned was kind of going outside the box beyond horticulture, which I think is very important. It's very easy to stay in your own bubble, but to expand beyond that and look at and see what's happening in other industries that we can bring to this segment is really important. I know you mentioned variable rate technology and variable rate application. Can you kind of talk about what you learned from those processes and how they could work in an environment like horticulture?
Yeah, so I mean, you look at big ag, I mean, it's amazing these days. So, you look at combines harvesting, seeding wheat and all that. I mean, because it's an analog crop that related to yield, they can sow seed in areas that are less productive, or they can spray areas that have been more problematic. And so, constantly, I love whether it's watching YouTube videos or looking at the equivalent to greenhouse grower on the field side. I mean, that has been instrumental into increasing yield, which is ultimately there's probably less farmland today farmed, but it's through these technologies that we've had higher consistent yields. And so last winter or week 50, I was down at the Syngenta farm with Express, and they have
Mhm.
it's called K-Poc is the name of the farm. And, I'm reading about all these technologies, and they actually had a pilot program where they got the cameras in the greenhouse, and it's not cameras to watch the people, it's cameras to monitor the crop, seeing how fast it grows, how do they, and, you take the human error out of it because you have the feel, but if you're taking images every minute or however it is, they can see the speed of growth or the stresses of the plant during the heat of the day, and
Yeah.
now they can make an adjustments. And so where I think short term where that's going to be huge value to this industry is just think about chemical applications. So right now, whether you're a biocontrol or a hybrid program or you're an old school, calendar spray program, really we're still pretty much a blanket approach. So, we're not fine tuning what we feed and how we feed just because of all the moving parts. I commented before where we kind of grow the fruit salad. So it's a
Yeah.
lot of averages, whether it's ADT or temperatures. But I think this technology will allow us to document stuff and react better. So instead of spraying the whole facility, with infrared cameras and some of the sensory imagery, it's going to pick up plant stress before the human eye does. Usually
Mhm.
by the time the human eye picks it up, you're already have, say, yellow leaves, necrosis, chlorosis, and all that kind of stuff. So we can take on problems head on in live time versus stumbling across it, if you will.
Right.
And that really intrigues me, or, you have an area. So I'm going to be working with plant products, and I'll be giving a talk at their grower day using a program called Scan It, where yellow sticky cards will go out there. They don't have lines. And so, that's probably not everyone's favorite, say, task to do because
Hmm.
it's important, but this technology will allow my growers to take pictures. The pictures will go up to the cloud. They'll be analyzed by AI, and I will get a weekly report.
Okay.
And we're going to do this for Farm One, which is about 10 acres of poinsettias. And we're going to do a hybrid approach for thrips and whitefly control, relying on the new Lalligard 52, which is the old Met 52, which is a metarhizium, combining it with our calcium sprays. And not that we're going to abandon our, say, calendar or prescribed applications. We're going to see, can we use this technology to scan the cards and make these applications weekly, and where it plays out. And so, I think the human error in counting yellow sticky cards, I've seen some numbers as high as 20-30%. They're trying to tell me with the AI measuring these sticky cards, the margin of error is less than 5%. So, those are things that, I think they're a little cost prohibitive, and we're doing this as a trial basis because a lot of these new technologies want to charge you per square foot per month,
Yeah.
subscription model stuff. But at the end of the day, they don't really have the data to support it works or it doesn't work. And so, there's obviously some time invested by myself and our organization, but you don't know if it works until you try it.
Right.
So that's one thing that I think, with this variable rate technology or the variable rate application, where you use the technology to figure out what your application rate, if it's needed or if more is needed. Um, and if you can do it by sensors or by cameras, I mean, if you think about it, maybe it's not as prominent here in the US, but if you
Hmm.
think about all the spy movies and so forth, Big Brother in Europe, I mean, it's like every corner of every street, there's imagery and stuff being monitored. So,
Yeah.
how can we take advantage of it is what I'm thinking that's going to be novel to the greenhouse of the future.
Thanks for joining us. You can learn more at greenhousegrower.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave us a rating as it helps other podcast listeners find the show.